Right off the bat, I want to just start by saying that obviously I am not an Arabic or Turkish speaker. And for that reason, there's every reason to believe that I'm going to massacre every single non-English word that I attempt to pronounce, including perhaps names. So in the interests of not offending anyone, or more importantly, embarrassing myself, I will use as many English translations or near translations as possible. This should help the video go smoother. But it shouldn't be hard to find these titles. If you just Google Alper Mestci, you should come up with a list of his films. And it's not such a robust filmography that you wouldn't be able to figure out what I'm talking about. In the 1970s and 80s, a slew of names came to the forefront of horror. John Carpenter, Tobe Hooper, David Cronenberg, Sean S. Cunningham. These were names that became freely associated with the genre and helped to define the movement of horror in America in the 80s and beyond. But there was other names too, probably not on the tip of the typical household, but among horror fans, they were equally as important. Names like Dario Argento and Lucio Fulci. And that's really the jump-off point here, because horror in America has become, I think it's safe to say, stagnant. Yes, James Wan has created an empire and Blumhouse has all but a monopoly on the Cineplex, but in general, we don't see the visionary directors coming out of the American Hollywood system like we saw in the 70s and 80s. And at the risk of repeating myself from earlier videos, I find this is a moment where it's important to look outside our borders to find that next level of talent. Now don't get me wrong, I would love to see some strong American talent just take the ball and run with it. But at the moment, I don't see that. What I do see is some international figures who are really pushing the envelope. In this series of videos, I hope to introduce you to some of these names, and maybe you'll check out their work, because honestly, I think you'll get much more from these creators than you will waiting for the next big American blockbuster horror film. Alper Mestci is a Turkish film director who started off in television, in comedy television. He's also the author of comedic novels. But what he's become best known for, and what's relevant to us, is the fact that this man reinvented Turkish horror. His first film was a thriller called Cin, but his second film was called Musallat, or The Haunted. And that film was a sensation in Turkey. It was also an extremely risky film at the time. Turkey is known as a moderate Islamic nation, but still there are strong traditions. And it was really uncertain whether the general movie-going public would embrace the idea of Islamic horror films, especially ones that were fairly graphic. As it turns out, there was not just an appetite for it. There was a voracious appetite for it, and The Haunted was an extremely big hit. This inspired Mestci to continue making horror films. His next production in 2010 would be a film called The Three Letters. Now, that title probably doesn't sound much like a horror film to you or I, but it's kind of a coded language issue. Those three letters would be C-I-N, which means jinn, what we know as genies. But in Islamic culture, these are extremely malevolent figures that can take human shape or astral shape or demonic shape. This was a changing point even more so than Musallat, because this film pulled no punches. It broke down doors wherever it could, and it introduced a new vocabulary for visual horror that had not really been seen anywhere in the world. It's difficult to find a Western analogy, but imagine elements of Phantasm, Nightmare on Elm Street, mixed with The Exorcist, The Evil Dead, but all done without any black humor or without any winking or nodding at the audience. This was taken seriously. The theology was sound, and the film was a very, very harrowing, frightening experience. It was a huge success as well. So, a sequel to The Haunted followed, and although Mestci did take a brief respite to make a comedy, by 2013, all the ideas, all the vocabulary he'd built up, all worked its way into a single project which would forever change Turkish cinema. Not just horror cinema in Turkey, the entire world of cinema in that part of the world. And that movie was Siccin. Siccin is like the Psycho or the Night of the Living Dead of Turkish horror cinema. It can't be overstated how important this movie was. And its approach to the genre is so different, so bold, and yet so simple. Mestci is a brilliant visual storyteller, and although sometimes the plots may seem somewhat simple and maybe somewhat repetitive, it never stops them from being endlessly effective. These are movies that really are defining a generation of horror fans in this part of the world. With Siccin being such a huge success, even bigger than all the previous work, it was only natural that a sequel would follow the next year. He also released another film in the Three Letters franchise. At this point, Mestci was basically an entire industry unto himself. He had 3 major series in the horror genre running simultaneously. It's amazing to see one central figure defining the genre for an entire culture. Now, there was other filmmakers who jumped on the bandwagon, and some of them made exceptional films. In fact, Mestci himself would work with many of them, basically shaping a generation of filmmakers in his image. The Siccin series continued with a 3rd, 4th, 5th, and last year 6th film. That one's purported to be the final. And maybe it will, maybe it won't. We'll see how much of a Western influence there has been in Turkey if we get a Siccin 7, A New Beginning, next year. But I don't think so. I don't think Mestci has to. I think he has enough creative power and enough of a catalog that he can do whatever he'd like. And certainly, he can start another franchise without harming any existing property he has now. He has opened up a society to modern horror. Not just modern as in he caught up to the West, I think he surpassed it. If I were the Wes Craven estate, who recently regained the rights to the Nightmare on Elm Street series, this is the only filmmaker I would call to develop, write, and direct the next installment. If they could get him into America, he would be the obvious choice, and it would create a completely uncompromising vision that I think all fans would appreciate. That said, I'm kind of hoping that America doesn't get their hands into him. Well, at least not from a production standpoint. I love what he's doing, and I really look forward to seeing how he influences the rest of the world. There's currently strong horror headwinds in countries like Malaysia, and they owe a lot to Mestci and his vision. But where I do hope America embraces him would be on a streaming platform. It would be great to see Shudder or another service get these films available. Yes, you can find the majority of them online and with subtitles in a lot of cases, but because of the platforms they're showing up on, no money is going back to the creator. And that's a shame. While it's true that many of us discovered Fulci and Argento through 3rd or 4th or 5th generation bootleg copies on VHS, I really wish it hadn't been that way and we could have shown our support from the very beginning. We have that opportunity today, but we need someone to step up to the plate and give us a platform to support this artist. Now, Mestci is not alone, and you're going to discover as the series progresses that there's a lot more talent out there making big differences in the world of horror. Getting behind these artists is your and my responsibility. Start a conversation about these artists. Make sure that we don't settle for just whatever we're being force-fed by Hollywood. And most importantly, don't be put off by subtitles. This year, the Best Picture Oscar went to a subtitled South Korean film. I just don't think we're still in that place where we automatically ignore anything not in our native language. Do you know Mestci's films? How badly did I pronounce most of these words? Let me know in the comments below. And keep the conversation going with other artists. If you think there's someone out there that you want championed, let me know. I'll check them out if I haven't, or if I have, maybe I'll make a video on it.